Okay, colleagues, and I hope we're live. Okay, I'm just gonna take a moment to double check that the stream is working, and we're going to begin. So, hopefully everything is already working, and let me just say that this is a very important lecture. In many ways, for many of you, this may be the most important lecture of the whole course. There are many reasons for that. I suppose the most important one being Hobbes, right? You, as far as I can tell, you will have Hobbes in almost every course you take here in the international relations program. I'm talking about, your main courses, courses in the international relations, or courses in political science or political philosophy. So without further introductions, let's begin. So this is Hobbes, the man himself. According to his biographers, especially handsome and with a nice deep voice. Anyway, so in your presentations, I always tell you to skip the biographical introductions unless they are relevant to the philosophy of the thinker that you are discussing. And this is basically the approach that I'm going to take as well. So you will read, the Hobbes' biography on your own if you're interested. But let me just say that in terms of his intellectual background, there are two basic things that we need to keep in mind. And these are the scientific Reformation and, the religious Reformation, Protestant Reformation of Martin Luther, and the scientific revolution. Now, in principle, it would be nice to have more time to maybe have something like a whole separate lecture on this stuff. But I'm gonna be very very brief, right? So the most important outcome of the religious Reformation is going to be chaos, extreme and utter chaos. The most important one being the 30 Years' War. So you can see the dates for Hobbes, for the 30 Years' War and for the English Civil War, right? So Hobbes witnessed two major conflicts of in his lifetime. Many more, but these two stand out. One again is the Civil War at home in England, which was horrible and bloody and devastating in all sorts of ways. And another one was the 30 Years' War, which ravaged through Europe. And again, both unfolded before Hobbes's very own eyes. And I'm going to talk about the Bible in a second. But you have to understand that to a large, 30 Years' War was obviously a very complicated conflict. It had many causes, social causes, cultural causes, economic causes even. But to some important extent, it was, among other things, it was also a conflict between Protestants and Catholics. And nominally, it has begun as a conflict between Protestants and Catholics. So next time somebody tells you that the Bible is a good guide to politics, remind them of the 30 Years' War. So according to historical estimates, a quarter to 50% of population of particular areas died during that conflict. So it's like, I think that the overall estimate is that the quarter of European population died, and in certain places up to 50% of the people died. Just if you pause about that and think about that for one moment, think of names of three of your friends. The first three names that come to your mind, and then one of these people are going to have to die. That's pretty devastating, right? Again, I hope that you have studied the Reformation in other courses, know something about Luther, so I will largely skip that. But the outcome of the religious Reformation led to a lot of political chaos in the face of war, in the guise of war, but also intellectual chaos, and led to a lot of, I guess, a resurgence of skepticism. Because you see, in the Middle Ages, and unfortunately we have to, in this course, we have to skip the Middle Ages. Now, I do also plan to upload some materials that are going to cover the Middle Ages, at least to some extent, and maybe even the Renaissance to some extent. But alas, we only have 14 classes, so I had to make my choice. The most important thing that comes out of the Middle Ages is going to be the natural law tradition. And we're going to talk about that next time on Saturday when we talk about John Locke. So, in an important respect, we have religious reformation covered. But still, so the eventual outcome of the Protestant Reformation is the destruction of the this idyllic feudal harmony of the Middle Ages. It wasn't all that harmonious, obviously, but in general, people in Europe had this sense that there was one. Most people, I would imagine, most educated people had an understanding that there's one true religion based in one reading of a single Bible, right? And Luther destroys that. Because, well, again, the story there's no time to go into, but basically Luther insists that the Catholic Church has misread, misinterpreted, but also mistranslated the Bible. And not only that, he finds some books in the Bible which he doesn't like, he throws them out. Books for which he, for example, cannot find originals. Like there are certain books of the Hebrew Bible which he can only find in Greek, but not in Hebrew. So he says, I don't have the originals, so he wants to throw them out. So like even to question what goes into the Bible, right? And as soon as Luther is successful in doing that, well, who can stop another person from having their own interpretation? So the medieval Christendom, the Christianity, split into two, and then into 3, 4, 5, 10 million, right? And today, well, not 10 million, but today we have the sociologists tell me 40,000 denominations of Christianity, 40,000. So, we go from one, well, it wasn't exactly one, but it was mostly one in Europe. So, but we go from 1 to 40,000, right? That's, and not to mention that again. There are other religions apart from Christianity, I have to remind my students sometimes. Anyway, so another thing that happens, and I'm going to talk about this a bit more, is that, so the result, the outcome of the Protestant Reformation is the emergence of the sovereign states. In the Middle Ages, you have this conflict, like who's going to be on top? Is it going to be the church or the state? The popes in Rome try to assert their dominance over the secular authorities. But by the end of the wars of religion, in most places, you have this cuius regio, eius religio, right? That the ruling, that the Peace of Augsburg and the Treaty of Worms, right? That the king, the sovereign, the secular ruler can decide the religion of the state. So the subordination of church to the state. So again, I'm talking about sovereign states, and very importantly, subordination of the church. Okay, and the second one is also kind of interesting, and this one has to do with growth of individual self-consciousness. And there's more to be said about this. There's interesting ideas, especially related to René Descartes and his rediscovery of the human subjectivity. Again, maybe I'll record some additional, videos to that effect. But anyway, it's kind of interesting because, with the emergence of the printing press, books become much more widely available. And people, historians tell me that without the printing press, there's no way that the Protestant Reformation could have been as successful as it was. And interestingly, you get this, because books become now cheap and available, people begin to read silently. And this leads to the emergence of, greater self-consciousness. Because you see, in the Middle Ages and in the ancient world, the books were so rare and so expensive that, and the culture was different. I mean, books were to be read out loud, the same way that almost nobody today reads music from a sheet, right? When you look at musical notes, sheet music, right? You imagine, you understand that it has to be performed. Nobody reads the musical score like that, right? So the same way in the Middle Ages and in antiquity, people read books out loud. But with this emergence of silent reading, where people have a book, one-to-one relationship with a book, reading it by themselves, understanding it by themselves, this leads to growth of individuality. And of course, first and foremost, I'm talking about reading the Bible by yourself and understanding the Bible in your own way. And I'm going to talk about this some more in a second. So this is one piece of important background. And for Hobbes, religious fanaticism is going to be a huge threat to the stability of the state. So he is going to write his Leviathan to a large extent against religious fanatics. Hobbes actually spends about half the book, half the Leviathan, arguing on matters of religion because they're so important. But ultimately, his stance, in line with the spirit of the day, is that complete and utter secularization, in the sense that it is the complete right of sovereign secular authority to decide all matters of religion. So Hobbes is going to be completely in line with that. Okay, and The second issue, and again, there's much more to be said about this, the second piece of background is scientific revolution, and especially the re-emergence of skepticism, empiricism, and materialism. Skepticism, empiricism, and materialism. So all of these skeptical attitudes that we have seen in Gorgias, that we have seen in Sextus Empiricus, many of them we will see once again in Hobbes. The most important one probably being this notion that, you see, Hobbes is going to say that truth with a capital T is not available to us as human beings, and nobody is infallible. That is why Hobbes is going to rest political power not on dialogue and consensus. Consensus is impossible, which is why, because consensus is impossible, we have to consent to be ruled by a supreme authority. So no consensus, but consent. We'll talk about this. So empiricism, again, is this idea that all knowledge is rooted in experience. One important outcome of this is going to be that Hobbes will be very critical of religion, and especially of religious prophecy, saying that any man who pretends to speak in the name of the divinity, how do we know that he or she is telling the truth and not being, let's say, mad or insane or just lying? Materialism is also going to be important. I'm going to talk about this in a second. So this is piece of the background. Yes, so I talked about wars and chaos. This is in some sense the most important intellectual piece of background for Hobbes, and therefore his question in general is going to be for Hobbes: how is society possible at all? And his idea is going to be like always perpetually afraid of wars and chaos. He's going to see how, in effect, all societies rest on violence, rest on force and violence. And we're going to talk about this in a second. So in this sense, Hobbes can be seen as the first sociologist, asking this question: how is society in principle possible at all? So I already talked about the 30 Years' War. Again, so 8 million people died, so 25 to 50% depending on the place. Okay, so I talked about Catholicism and Protestantism. So yeah, okay. I'm backtracking a little bit, but let me get out this quote. So again, in Catholicism in the Middle Ages, you had this notion that there's collective responsibility. You can, if your loved one died, you can still pray for them, and this is why, incidentally, you could sell indulgences. Right? Indulgences worked in this way of collective responsibility. We don't stand face to face with God, but we stand before the face of God as a collective body. And also, I have this word, papal infallibility. Papal infallibility is that the priests, the Catholic Church, has the authoritative right given to them by God to read the scripture in the correct way, and God, in a certain sense, guarantees that the popes cannot be wrong, right? So all of this goes out the window. So now we have Protestantism, and you have individual relation and individual responsibility of man before God. Again, so this Søren Kierkegaard, one of the foremost theologians of Protestantism, writing much later, but still has this phrase, fear and trembling, which I think wonderfully captures the spirit of Protestantism, right? And this idea that you have personal responsibility to read and interpret the Bible, right? And in a certain important respect, proper Protestants are not supposed to have priests. You can have elders, people who have read the Bible for a longer period of time than you, and who can give you some advice on how to read the Bible, but never authoritative, At the end of the day, it is your personal responsibility to read it in a particular fashion. Okay, and I suppose, because this is going to be, and Hobbes would agree with this. Except that, so he would say that we should read the Bible in our own way. However, if we did that, this would lead to chaos and civil war. So reading the Bible in our own way, we should give up our right of reading the Bible in our own way to the secular sovereign, not because the secular sovereign has any particular claim to know the Bible better than anybody else, but because this simply leads to peace. We'll talk about this later. And I should also mention, notice that the Bible, both the Hebrew Bible, so the Torah, right, and the Christian New Testament, these are not books. These are libraries of many books. And it is, some people believe that the Bible was written by God. By the way, the Bible does not make this claim. The Bible never makes this claim. According to tradition, the first 5 books of the Bible were written by Moses. Then later books were written by particular people. Like Amos was written by Amos, for example. Or let's say Ecclesiastes was written by Ecclesiastes, right? And the books of the New Testament, of the Christian New Testament, are also usually, the idea is that they were written by somebody. Most of them were written by Paul, who is also not God, right? But so the Bible, in most places, is very clearly written by people, like even within the biblical tradition itself. It's the penmanship of the Bible belongs, the authorship of the Bible belongs to the people. It is the people who wrote the Bible. And then, much more importantly, it was the people who decided which books to include in the Bible. And if you believe that people can make mistakes, if you believe that people can lie, if you believe that people can be corrupted, then how do you know that the people who decided which books to include in the Bible were not corrupted, did not lie, did not make mistakes, right? This is a big and important and a problematic question. And notice, the Bible or the Quran or the Rig Veda or the Bhagavad Gita, so none of the sacred texts, they do not have a theory of themselves. There's no separate chapter in the Bible which is called the theory of the Bible. There is no separate chapter in the Quran which is called the theory of the Quran. Now, people say about the Quran that it was written by Allah, that is the uncreated word of God. The Quran never makes this claim in its own right. You can open the book and see it, right? So it is people who interpret these texts. The texts do not interpret themselves. It's quite imaginable. That the texts would do that, but they don't. They don't, right? And so this is something to keep in mind. Although, again, and you see this problem of relativism, we keep coming back to. Hobbes very much is going to be a relativist. And Hobbes, I think, go back to this idea that we had from Epicureans last time, and from the skeptics as well, right? That, Aristotle would say that this world, so actually, yes, so we're talking about mechanistic and teleological worldviews. These two issues are related. So Aristotle would say, in his teleological fashion, he looks outside the window and he says, this world is far too orderly to have come about simply as a result of random chance. This is Aristotle. This world is far too orderly. Well, the Epicureans, the skeptics, and Thomas Hobbes are going to say, no, it is exactly the other way around. This world is far too chaotic to be a product of an intelligent designer, right? So the Epicureans and the skeptics and Hobbes are going to be skeptical about the existence of a providential God. This world is not guided by a benevolent or beneficent divinity. Now, Hobbes' religious position is going to be complicated, but in general, like a one-liner is that whatever Hobbes believes about God, he certainly maintains that God is incomprehensible. Does it mean that he's an atheist? Well, it is a complicated story, and people debate and will debate for all eternity. But God is incomprehensible. And because God is incomprehensible, it is absurd and wrong to say that, let's say, God is good, and therefore God is providential and will rectify all the wrongdoing, etc., etc. Why? Because if God is incomprehensible, then God by definition moves in mysterious ways, and you cannot count on being able to understand God or understand his or her or its designs, however you want to construe God, right? Yeah, well, okay, this was a bit haphazard, but we need to get to Hobbes. So let's push forward. So yeah, so the teleological view in Aristotle, especially this idea that there's natural hierarchy and also that there's absolute standard of morality, and for people like Hobbes, again, and after the scientific revolution, no, you see, again, you had natural hierarchy in the world for Hobbes. For Aristotle, that there are perfect spheres, perfect heavens above, and sinful earth below. For Hobbes, not so, especially after Newton, although Newton is going to be writing a bit later, but still, for Newton, you see, like, I wave my arm, and me waving my arm affects the trajectory of the sun. We have this wonderful formula, again, so this, the abyss of the purposeless chaos of matter, but the formula, Newton's formula of universal gravitation, F equals G multiplied m1 by m2 divided by r squared. So m1 is me, m2 can be the sun, or, Sagittarius A star, the black hole at the center of the Milky Way galaxy, right? I wave my arm and I affect the motions of the planets. So this natural hierarchy is broken. Right, again, and we are left with this abyss of the purposeless chaos of matter. Very much, again, this world is going to be chaotic matter in motion. We're going to get to this in a second. I could talk about this for much more, but we need to get to Hobbes. So I apologize for rushing forward a little bit. Anyway, so again, so man is a political animal. Yeah, Hobbes is not necessarily going to agree with this, and certainly he's going to repudiate Aristotle's teleological worldview. Anyway, so finally, let's get to the Leviathan. So and again, I apologize for rushing, but I want to get a big chunk out today. So we need to push forward. So first of all, let's start with the title. Let's start with the title of the book. Well, this book, by the way, has a very complicated history. It's actually a third edition. Not exactly a third edition. It's Hobbes' third attempt. So Hobbes first wrote a book called Elements of Law. Then he has rewritten it as a work with a Latin title, De Cive, on the Citizen, and then Leviathan is his third attempt. So it's kind of it's a bit of a mess. It's a bit of a mess. Those of you who are going to read it next year, there are all sorts of minor discrepancies and inconsistencies in the text of the Leviathan, which makes it often very difficult to read. But still. So keeping this in mind. Let's look at the book itself. So the book is titled Leviathan. And Leviathan is a name of a sea monster from the book of Job. So in the book of Job, there's this wonderful scene where Job is very upset about how God mistreats him, although he still remains loyal to God. And at one point, Yahweh comes down. Yahweh looks at Job and he actually speaks to Job and says, "Who the heck are you, Job? Do you know who I am? I am Yahweh. I have done so many great and awesome things." And when Yahweh is bragging to Job, Yahweh is saying, "Do you know this horrible sea monster, Leviathan, this great and powerful beast everybody's afraid of? I have chained Leviathan. Leviathan is my dog," something like that, right? And so this is, Yahweh uses the Leviathan to brag about himself, basically, in the Bible. But the quote that we need is this, that Leviathan beholds all high things. He is the king of all the children of pride. So the first part, beholds all high things. It means that Leviathan is above everything. There is nothing above Leviathan. So beholds all high things, meaning, again, let me add this, nothing above. Above him, right? And he is the king of over all the children of pride. The king of all the children of pride. And this is going to be the main idea of the book, the Leviathan, that through fear, use the government, the purpose of the sovereign is to use fear to control pride. That's going to be the basic idea. Okay. So, and wow, jumping around all over the place. Where was I? Sorry about that. Yeah. So this is the frontispiece of the book. Hobbes actually did not draw this, but I think Hobbes drew a draft for this frontispiece. So this is a picture which is authorized by Hobbes himself. This does not belong here. Somewhere else. Anyway. So we have basically two parts. So the first part is that here we have the king, and it says non est potestas super terram quae comparatur. This is from Job, again, this idea that there's no power on earth that can compare to the Leviathan. This is again another quote from the Bible, which is again the meaning for the title. And again, notice how so we have a king, but his body is made out of people. So you have these small people. So the Leviathan is made from people. Again, this is a book about the social contract. The political body, the Commonwealth, is made from people. And in his left hand, he holds the sword, which is the earthly power, and in his, or I suppose in his right hand. And in his left hand, he holds the papal scepter or something like that, the churchly power. And again, we're going to discuss this in a second. But again, this idea that for Hobbes, the sovereign should wield absolute authority. So again, you see on the left we have the castle, the crown, the cannon, the arms, and the battle, right? So complete secular authority. And on the right you have the church. Sorry, the ecclesiastical tiara. We have these are, I think, as far as I understand, these arrows are the arrows of excommunication. So when you excommunicate somebody, like you expel them from the body of the believers, you expel them from the church. And here you have the horns of the dilemma. So this is the symbol of the universities. And the last one is either a court or maybe some other university procedure or something like that. So we have complete power over all the secular matters and over all religious, intellectual, university matters, like complete rights of censorship and everything. So complete power over everything. Okay. So this is going to be the end. Our task by the end of today is to understand this picture. So let us begin basically where Hobbes himself begins. Let us begin with Hobbes' understanding of the state of nature. And when Hobbes talks about the state of nature, I'm going to talk about this more in a second, but this is Hobbes' way, when talking about the state of nature, this is Hobbes' way of talking about human nature. So he's trying to ask what humans are by nature. Remember, Hobbes says that, Aristotle says that man is by nature a political animal. Not so for Hobbes, not so for Hobbes. So we have these 6 points. So the first one is that the whole world is chaotic matter in motion. The abyss of the purposeless chaos of matter. And there is no pre-established harmony, and this world is not a happy place. It's not a good place. There are no providential gods. Nobody. If something bad happens to you, God will not come down from His heaven and help you. Okay. So the second idea is that by nature, human beings have insatiable appetites. So I have this slightly more expanded version. So our appetites are various. They are insatiable. And reason cannot tell us what is good or what is evil. Reason will not tell us what is good and what is evil. Reason can only be used to calculate the best way to achieve our desires, which are various and insatiable. However, it's also important to remember that there's one desire that everybody has in common, and this is the fear of death. As a phrase that came to my mind is that for Hobbes, good is subjective, but death is objective. Or if you want, appetites are subjective, but death is objective. Everybody is afraid of death. You can think about this in the following phrase, right? Whatever appetites you may have, right? Think to Callicles, back to Callicles. The many and extravagant desires. Whatever desires you have, in order to be able to satisfy them, first and foremost, you need to be alive in order to satisfy these desires. So the desire to live, or the fear of death, is the necessary condition for the satisfaction of any other desire. So the next point is that by nature we live in a condition of scarcity, precisely because our desires are various and insatiable. By definition, we cannot have enough. Again, if everybody is pleonexic, or if everybody is potentially pleonexic, want more than their fair share, then there can never be enough for everybody, right? So there is no natural tendency to cooperate among the people. Okay, so point number 4 is that people are glory-seeking, more or less glory-seeking. So, which is to say that some people are more glory-seeking, some people are less glory-seeking, but you cannot know who is who, right? And so there's going to be a question, which is an interesting question for 1 minute, but no, we shouldn't spend more than 1 minute on this question. Is that Hobbes says that basically the Leviathan should keep pride in check through fear. That's the primary task of the government, to keep ambition and pride in check through fear of punishment, right? So, and then people always begin to ask, yes, but if we're all afraid to die, what about firefighters? What about policemen? What about soldiers? And the answer, well, first of all, the answer is that when you become a policeman or a firefighter, this is not death sentence, okay? It's a risky job, but most firefighters survive. Students have told me that even Wehrmacht in 1945, the casualty rate was 50%. 50%. 50% is not 100%, okay? So a 50% chance of surviving is sometimes not too bad, right? But still, you see, there's the idea that there are people who are glory-seeking, and because they are glory-seeking, they will be willing to take the odds. They will be willing to take the risk to acquire to themselves glory. So again, I think it's an interesting question, but please let us not spend more than 1 minute on this question. Because, Hobbes has no problem explaining why you have soldiers and policemen. Because there's always more than enough glory-seeking animals. We're all animals, right? So man is a glory-seeking animal. There's more than enough glory-seeking people to occupy these positions. Okay, so number 5 is mistrust, that we cannot trust one another. And in this sense, even offensive wars for Hobbes are going to be defensive wars, because since you do not know what to expect, you do not know sort of who's going to attack you in the future and with what kind of weapons, right? You can never have enough you can never have enough security. You can never have enough security. So even offensive wars can be counted as defensive wars. So, in Hobbesian analysis, Hitler invading Poland in 1939, this is a defensive war because he's trying to protect himself against, future incursion from Soviet Union or something like that. And point number 6, in the state of nature, before we enter into civil society, before we make a social contract, in the state of nature, human beings are fundamentally equal. So before society is established, even the strongest person needs to sleep. And while you are asleep, even the weakest person can come and kill you. Well, when we say weakest, weakest broadly speaking, right? But again, I hope that this idea is clear enough. And again, so when we talk about this kind of equality, Hobbes understands that human beings are very unequal. Some are taller, some are shorter, some are stronger, some are weaker, some are smarter, some are not so smart. But still, in the state of nature, even the weakest usually can kill the strongest. For example, while the strongest is asleep. So there is no security. It's like men are different, but nobody is a god. Nobody is a titan. Nobody is a Heracles, right? Okay. So, yeah. Okay, now I'm going to have to try to sort this out. Okay, I have a million quotes here, so I need to find a way to find this. Well, yeah, I suppose maybe let's start. Yeah, I suppose let's start with this stuff. Okay. So these are quotes in explanation of these 6 points. So matter and motion, insatiable appetites, etc. So let's start with matter and motion. Again, this very famous quote. Hobbes says that life is but a motion of limbs. Life is simply a motion of limbs. And human beings have some part within them that moves like a spring, right? And Hobbes compares. So life is motion of limbs. And Hobbes compares human life to robots, basically. He says all automata have artificial life and sort of automata, engines that move themselves by springs and wheels, as does a watch. Okay. And yeah, so he talks about how, heart is just a spring, nerves are strings, and joints, wheels, etc., etc. So again, so this idea that life is, there is no interesting difference between human beings and mechanical clocks. Right, and so also he's gonna give this analogy between a mechanical clock and the mechanism of the state. Although I'm not sure this is probably not important. Now, the really important part about all of this. So I keep saying that we're talking about this chaotic matter in motion. Now, what is the upshot of this? The upshot of this idea that we are chaotic matter in motion is this. This is the famous quote, which I gave you many, many times. So let's look at it now in context. So what does it mean to say that life is simply a motion of limbs? What does it mean to say that the universe is the abyss of the purposeless chaos of matter? What does it mean to repudiate Aristotle's teleological worldview? It is to assert that there is no objective universal standard of goodness. Here's the quote. Whatsoever is the object of any man's appetite or desire, that is it which he, for his part, calls good, and the object of his hate and aversion, evil. For these words, good and evil, are always used only with relation to the person that uses them. Say hi to Protagoras. The words good and evil are always relative to the person that uses them. There being nothing simply and absolutely so. Nothing is simply or absolutely good or evil, and we're all just matter in motion. And at the end of the day, it's a very ominous doctrine, right? So everything is matter in motion. One matter in motion is me planting flowers. So I like planting flowers. I plant flowers. This is my matter in motion. And somebody else eats children. It's matter in motion. In and of itself, it's not good. It's not bad. It's just matter in motion according to the laws of nature. According to the laws of cause and effect. Hobbes, incidentally, is also not going to believe in free will, right? As a mechanicist, Newtonian-style mechanicist, although Newton is writing after Hobbes, right? But still, as a mechanicist, Hobbes believes that things are determined. There's strict deterministic cause and effect relationship. So this is Hobbes' deep amoralism, anti-moralism. That there's no such thing as morality. There's only human selfish desires, relativistic desires, and so this is the full quote in common again. So we call evil what we desire. We call good what we desire. We call evil what we hate. Nothing is simply and absolutely so. And then he says there's no common rule of good and evil to be taken from the object themselves. But the rule of good and evil is taken from the person of the man, where there is no commonwealth. But in commonwealth, so in society, we take the rule of good and evil from the person who represents us, or as an arbitrator or in judge, whom men disagreeing shall by consent set up and make his sentence the rule thereof. So I kept talking about how in the state of nature, consensus is impossible. So men who cannot agree, we cannot agree. We don't know. Say hi to Gorgias, say hi to Sextus Empiricus. We cannot know what is objective goodness. We cannot agree. So since we cannot agree, we set up by consent, we set up a judge or an arbitrator and agree to disagree, agree to simply go along with what this judge is going to say. Not because this judge knows the truth, but because consenting to whatever is better than disagreeing and continuing to fight. Because, any kind of peace is better than war. Okay. So, and Hobbes is going to immediately talk about ataraxia, right? So he says, continual success in obtaining those things which man from time to time desires, that is to say, continual prospering, is that which men call felicity or happiness. And he says, felicity of this life. For there is no such thing as perpetual tranquility of mind while we live here. Okay? So Hobbes explicitly says, ataraxia is impossible for human beings. This is his assumption. He says, life itself is but motion. Life is motion. Life is motion of limbs. And life can never be without desire, can never be without fear, no more than without sense. And then he adds, he says, what kind of happiness God has prepared for the believers, a man shall no sooner know than enjoy, being joys that are now as incomprehensible as the word of the theologians, beatifical vision is unintelligible. So Hobbes very explicitly says, so he says, in this life, we have this perpetual and restless desire for pleasure after pleasure, and this desire ceases only in death. Ataraxia is impossible, and also what happens to us after we die, we do not know. There is no natural knowledge of what happens to human beings after they die. And in fact, again, Hobbes spends half the book talking about the Bible, and I encourage you, open the Bible, see what the Bible says about afterlife. It's not so clear. It's not so clear. Hobbes has, among other things, a theological argument, to support his position that we do not know what's going to happen to us after we die. Do we have immortal souls? It's not so clear. Not so clear. Actually, the Bible is not particularly clear on that. No. Actually, I can make a stronger case. The Bible doesn't talk about immortal souls. Immortal souls have been imported into Christianity from Platonism. There's no such thing as immortal soul in the Bible. If you find references to immortal souls in the Bible, tell me. Anyway, so yeah, so it's the same quote but in different style. Yeah. So again, Hobbes says there's no such thing as summum bonum, as is spoken in the books of moral philosophers, great as good. Felicity is continual progress of desire from one object to another. And he says that the object of our desire is not to enjoy now, but also to ensure our good life in the future. And therefore, the voluntary actions of man tend not only to procuring, but also to ensuring a contented life. And this is important. Why? So again, so it's perpetual and restless desire of power after power that ceases only in death. And the problem, okay, so I'm not going to read the whole quote, but the basic idea is that, you see, even if you are satisfied for today, even if right now you feel comfortable and fine, still Hobbes says, where is the guarantee that you will be fine tomorrow? So again, I talked about this idea how all wars are defensive wars. So Hobbes says, even if right now you are fine, you should not lie idle or restless. you should try to secure yourself against potential dangers that could come to you tomorrow. And this is why, in the state of nature, when there is no guarantee of peace, you can never be at rest. You are always in fear, always in fear. Okay. Yeah, so I talked already about this idea a second ago about, Hobbes. One commentator calls Hobbes a Christian atheist. It's a very interesting moniker, with a question mark, because again, Hobbes has complicated theology. Does Hobbes believe in God? There's no simple answer to this question. Probably for our purposes, the easiest thing is to assume that Hobbes is simply an atheist. Like, first pass, Hobbes is an atheist. Next year, we're going to discuss the nuances of Hobbes' religious views, right? Basically, Hobbes holds that God is incomprehensible. And again, in this Epicurean fashion, I don't want to say quasi-Epicurean fashion, but like not unlike the Epicureans. Remember, Epicureans say that gods don't care about us. Well, Hobbes doesn't exactly say that. But when he says that God is incomprehensible, he's like, we do not know. We do not know, and we cannot know whether God cares about us or not, right? And we have no natural knowledge of what happens to us after we die, and the sovereign shall decide all matters of religion. So this is important. Okay. Yeah, and he actually talks about this natural seed of religion. Hobbes is actually being very impolite to religious people. He says that there are 4 causes of religion. It is the mistaken opinion of ghosts. It is ignorance of causes. It is devotion towards what men fear, or I should say superstitious devotion towards what men fear. Well, no, maybe not. I don't know. Let's not add things. And also, superstition, taking things casual for prognostics. So basically, he says there are 4 limitations of the human mind, and these 4 limitations are the cause of religion. He's again being very impolite. And he says, with Critias, and with Protagoras, Hobbes says that the purpose of religion is not to be true. Who cares about the truth of religion? Hobbes does not care about that. He's never going to discuss this, right? For Hobbes, you don't have a philosophical, metaphysical, or theological justification of religion. You have a political justification of religion. We need religion for political reasons. He says, religion makes man obedient, law-abiding, peaceful, charitable, and sociable. This is why we need religion. Religion makes man sociable and peaceful, afraid to break the law. This is why we need religion. Again, there's social consequences. Truth of religion is not important whatsoever. It may be true, it may not be true. Again, Hobbes is a skeptic, so we cannot know. But again, it's like the sovereign has to decide what the religion is going to be, and we should follow the religion of the sovereign, not because the sovereign knows better, but because it guarantees peace. Okay, yeah. So I'm probably talking about this out of order, and maybe I should just skip that. I don't know. Reputation of power is power. Is that important? Glory seeking. Yeah. In the seminars, somebody. If I have fans of War and Peace, it's been very long since I've read the book, but I think there was this character, Dolokhov, who in the Battle of Austerlitz or something like that, captures a French officer. Like, it does something very bold, but he's clearly doing this only to get reinstated back in his position as an officer. So we have a person, I think it's Dolokhov, who risks his life in a very, what's the right phrase, reckless manner, but he does it completely and utterly selfishly. Like, his reason for this is entirely selfish. Like this Caliclean, Machiavellian reason. The only reason why he does this is because he wants to get promoted. He was an officer, he was demoted, and now he wants to get his position back. Okay, equality, I already talked about this. Yeah, okay, this is the most famous quote. So again, we keep talking about this, right? These 6 points about the state of nature. And so if the world is chaotic, if we have insatiable appetites, we live in a condition of scarcity, men are glory seeking, we cannot trust one another, and we're all fundamentally equal, which means that no one is safe. Ultimately, no one is safe. Or let's say we are equally unsafe. We are equally unsafe. Okay. So by nature, we are not political, but by nature, we live in a condition where there is no place for industry, no culture of the earth, no navigation, no use of commodities that may be imported by sea, because there is no importation by sea, no large buildings, no instruments of moving and removing such things as require much force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no maps, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death. and life of men, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So this is the result. This is the result of these 6 things, right? And Hobbes continues, to this war of every man against every man. This is also the consequence. Nothing can be unjust. The notions of right and wrong, justice and injustice have no place in the state of nature. Where there is no common power, there is no law. Where there is no law, there is no injustice. Force and fraud are in war 2 cardinal virtues. And again, in the state of nature, we are completely entitled to all uses and advantages of war. And in fact, the person who is sociable and who sort of tries to help others is simply destroying themselves. Being kind to others is stupidity in the state of nature and is actually against the laws of nature, which we'll talk about in a second. Likewise, in the state of nature, there is no such thing as private property. This is an important idea. We'll again, when we talk about Jean-Jacques Rousseau, I would say that Rousseau is actually in basic agreement with Hobbes on more or less almost every major issue. And Rousseau is going to agree with this idea. So both Rousseau and Hobbes believe that in the state of nature, there is no private property. Like by nature, by the law of nature, you cannot take something and say, this is mine by right. But the only thing that you can do, so again, there's no property, no dominion, no mine and thine, but only that to every man that he can get, and only for so long as he can keep it. So you can try to take certain thing from common stock and try to hold on to it but with your force of your arms, but you can have no right, no title to it. And in this sense, when we're going to talk about the sovereign, for both Rousseau and Hobbes, you have no property rights against the sovereign. Because in the state of nature, there are no property rights. So whatever you have in society, you actually owe to the sovereign. Because he or she or it, the sovereign protects you. Right? And in this sense, all of our property rights for both Rousseau and Hobbes can only be secondary. The sovereign can conditionally allow us to enjoy something. But in general, there is no property. And this is going to be a big difference between Hobbes and Rousseau on the one hand, and John Locke on the other. Locke is going to try to challenge that. Probably not very successfully, but we'll talk about this next time. Okay, yeah. So again, and Hobbes says that when we talk about this war of all against all, the state of nature, when do we see this time, the state of nature, right? And he says that the state of nature exists at all time where men live without a common power to keep them all in awe. So whenever there is no common power to keep all men in awe, we are in the state of nature. And he says that the state of nature is not just active fighting, but the state of nature is a condition where you cannot guarantee peace, cannot guarantee security. So if there is no guarantee of peace, if there is no common power to keep people, again, in awe, in fear, to keep people in fear and thereby to keep people in check, then we are in the state of nature. So it's like, if you want, Cold War also counts as the state of nature, fear of security. Yeah, okay, so this is another quote, but this is basically explanation of these 6 points that I talked about before. Competition, difference, glory, which makes men invade for gain, safety, and reputation. Glory-seeking people, right? So again, like this general notion that in the state of nature, you should first ask questions later. Okay, so what should I talk about next? Well, maybe let's talk about this. So Hobbes says, well, many people are going to object. And many people are going to say, Hobbes, you are being pessimistic. Human beings are not nearly as bad as you describe. And Hobbes tries to respond. He says, yes, it may seem strange to a lot of people that nature should make men so horrible and violent. But then Hobbes says, if you do not trust me that human beings are by nature so bad, consider this. When taking a journey, you arm yourself and go and seek to go well accompanied. When going to sleep, you lock your door. And I can ask you, do you, my dear listener, do you lock your door when you go to sleep? Even when in your house, you lock your chest. Do you have a safe in your house? You or your parents, do you have a like a safe box, right? And this, when you know that there are laws and public officers, that there's police armed to revenge all injuries that shall be done to you. What opinion do you, my dear listener, have of your fellow citizens when you ride armed? Well, we don't ride armed, but we have police in the street, right? What opinion do we have of our fellow citizens when we lock our door? right? Do you not there as much accuse mankind by your actions as I do by my words, says Hobbes. Like if you do not, and again, so again, Hobbes is talking about the state of nature. So it's like, even now in society, you do not trust other people and you lock your door. But there is police and surveillance cams and all the rest of it. How much worse it would be in the state of nature without the power to keep all men in check. Again, this is going to be a big question that we'll keep coming back to. Again, Locke, for example, is going to try to argue that human beings are by nature good. And we're going to ask this question to Locke. How can Locke justify his position if somehow we have to lock our doors, even in society? Honestly, I don't think that Locke is going to have a very strong answer, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, sorry. Wow. Hang on a second. Where was I? That's bad. Whoops. This is why I hate PowerPoint. Okay. Yes. So we live in this horrible condition, but couple other things I think we need to talk about. Yes. Anyway, yeah. So when we talk about the state of nature, we can ask, is the state of nature real? I mean, can you see it if you look outside the window? And there are complications. So first of all, like, state of nature is a way to talk about human nature, what human beings are by nature. And in some extent, I think it's a hypothetical. So it's like a thought experiment for Hobbes. What would happen, like, if you try to isolate like an ideal type? If you think of the properties of pure calcium, you don't actually see pure calcium in nature. But if you try to isolate calcium and isolate it in a test tube and see what the properties are, so in some sense, this is what Hobbes is trying to do. He's trying to strip away all the ramifications of society, all the social conditions, and try to see what human beings are by nature. And this idea that if society collapses, then we all go back to the state of nature. So it's like the state of nature is perpetually, the state of nature perpetually exists now, like in every situation. If the civil power breaks down, we immediately automatically go back to the state of nature. It's like if you imagine that the state of nature is like a ground level, and we build society on top of the state of nature. And if something goes wrong with society, we'll always fall back down to the state of nature. So it's always there in the background, always ready to materialize itself. However, at the same time, Hobbes seems to suggest that this is not a historical condition of the earliest humans. Now, it's a complicated topic. And we need to introduce some finesse here, right? So, in general, the state of nature is very much real for Hobbes. You can see the state of nature when there's a breakdown of the civil government, and the states between themselves are in the state of nature. So all sovereigns are perpetually in the state of nature. So you can see the state of nature with your eyes. It is also real. Right? But at the same time, it is probably not the historical condition of the earliest humans. So Hobbes says that it may be thought that there was never such a time when a condition of war as this, and I believe it was never generally so all over the world. So why does Hobbes say this? I think he says this because Hobbes was, among other things, he was a little bit of an historian, right? So among other things, he translated, books of Thucydides, for example, in English. And so I think that Hobbes knows from historical record that you cannot really assume, you cannot really find evidence that there was a condition of war against all over the earth. Like, for example, the Bible doesn't tell us about that, right? I mean, that's not to say that the Bible is a reliable historical document, but Hobbes had to work with something, right? Anyway, so this is probably Hobbes hedging his bets. So he says, maybe it may very well be, he says, I do not claim that there was a time, indeed, in early historical past, where there was this war of all against all, right? But he says there are many places where people live like this now. For example, savage people in many places of America, except for the government of small families, the concord whereof depends on natural lust, have no government at all, and live to this day in this brutish manner, as I said before. Now notice, he talks about small families. So families for Hobbes are natural, but societies are not. Families are natural, societies are not. And again, colleagues, nobody, I hope, will make this mistake. Again, you can't, the state of nature is not just a thought experiment. He says this right here. If you go to America and look at how savages live in the Americas, you will see the state of nature with your very own eyes. You will see this war of all against all. Now he says there are small families which are concordant within themselves, but between families, between tribes, they constantly fight against one another. And actually, anthropologists tell me that Hobbes is by and large right. That sort of if you look at bones of early humans, of our early hunter-gathering communities, that this is true. You have tribes which are more or less related to each other by blood, and these would be tribes of maybe up to approximately 40 individuals, ballpark 40 individuals. But between these tribes, there's constant warfare, and like genocidal warfare. Anyway, so in this sense, maybe Hobbes has something going for him. And again, Hobbes would say that whenever the civil authority breaks down, you can actually go back to the state of nature. Like at the time of the Civil War, especially between the factions, you get certain approximations to the state of nature. Like, let's say, in no man's land, between two opposing warring factions. Think about the 30 Years' War. Imagine marauding armies looting through the city. There's no protection, no safety. It's just the might makes right, rule of the strongest. Completely no safety. And also, he says that even though historically men were never in this condition all over the world, however, at all times, kings and persons of sovereign authority are perpetually in the state and posture of gladiators, having their weapons pointing and their eyes fixed on one another. That is, their forts, garrisons, and guns upon the frontiers of their kingdoms, and continual spies upon their neighbors, which is a posture of war. So Hobbes says here, right, that if you want to see the state of nature is always there in international relations. That again, so Hobbes is one of the founders, or one of the sort of key figures in the realist tradition in international relations. And Hobbes would say that conflict is an irreducible, essential part or characteristic of international relations. So again, kings between themselves, or sovereign representatives, kings, princes, presidents, something like that, right, are always in the state of nature between each other. Well, not exactly presidents. Presidents is a complicated issue we'll get to at some point, maybe later, right? But also, again, we're going to talk about this in a second, but you see, the sovereigns themselves, so if you imagine the king never signs the social contract. This is a bit of a complication, Hobbes. The king never signs the social contract. So kings between themselves are in the state of nature, but also a king vis-a-vis his subjects, his or her subjects, is also in the state of nature. So kings in relation to their subjects are also in the state of nature. We'll talk about this in a second. Okay, so again, we have this horrible condition, war of all against all. So the question is, how can we leave this condition? How can we get out of this condition? And Hobbes says that we have passions that incline man to peace. Fear of death, and, well, to a much lesser extent, much less important, but still, there's this desire of commodious living. But first and foremost, there's fear of death, right? So through fear of death, we are inclined to leave the state of nature. It doesn't happen automatically. There's going to be a big problem, especially for those of you who are going to write next year. How exactly do we get out of the state of nature? Because if human beings are so mistrustful, and if you have this rule, shoot first, ask questions later, can actually people gather together and start making a social contract? It seems impossible. This is called the first mover problem. It's going to be a big problem many of you are going to wrestle with next year, but this year we don't have to worry about it too much. So again, so we have this fear of death, this desire, and reason, says Hobbes, reason suggests convenient articles of peace. Convenient articles of peace, which are the laws of nature. I'm going to talk about them in a second. Laws of nature, upon which man may be drawn to agreement. Right? So, and these are going to be the laws of nature. This is one big problem for not having talked about medieval tradition, because in the Middle Ages there was this notion of the laws of nature, right? The laws of nature, which are somehow maybe, especially in the Middle Ages, for Jews, Christians, and Muslims, the idea is that God makes the laws of nature, and in fact, through reason, everybody can know the laws of nature, and so by nature, human beings are sociable and consensual, because we're all God's children. So this was like the especially under the influence of Aristotle, we have this tradition in the Middle Ages. Hobbes would have none of this. Well, I mean, he has his own laws of nature, but they are different. We're going to talk about them in a second. Okay, so Yeah. So first of all, and we're going to see this in a second, right? So first of all, Hobbes begins with this idea of the right of nature. He says the right of nature is the liberty that each man has to use his own power for the preservation of his life. So the right of nature is the liberty that each man has to use his power for the preservation of his own life, and consequently of doing anything, which in his own judgment and reason he shall conceive to be the best means. This is the right of nature. Next, let's talk about the law of nature. The law of nature, he says, is a general rule found out by reason, by which a man is forbidden to do that which is destructive of his life, or takes away the means of preserving it. And this is going to be important. Every man has a right to everything, even to one another's body, for the purpose of self-preservation. So you see, this is going to be the difference, right? So the medieval tradition, under the influence of Aristotle, would say that all people know that it's wrong to lie, it's wrong to steal, it's wrong to cheat, and we should keep our promises, and we should pay our debts. This is how the laws of nature were understood in the Middle Ages, right? And this is completely not Hobbes' account. Hobbes' account is much closer to Callicles and to Antiphon. He says, no, the law of nature tells you that in order to preserve yourself, in order to guarantee your preservation today and tomorrow, you can do whatever you want, even kill other people, right? And notice this right to all things. Every man has a right to everything. If you think about this for 5 seconds, this is equivalent to saying that actually no man has a right to nothing. These are the kinds of laws of nature that Hobbes is talking about. Again, everybody has a right, every man has a right to everything, which is to say that nobody has any particular right to anything. Kind of this, again, going back to this idea of chaotic matter in motion, that fundamentally and ultimately there is no universal law, universal standard, or universal morality. The universal law is the law of the jungle, every man for himself. Okay, so so in a condition such as this, every man has a right to everything, even to one another's body. Okay. Because you do not, well, complicated story, I don't want to get into this. And Hobbes then talks about these precepts of reason. 19 laws of nature. So there are 19 in total. We're going to talk about the first 3 because they are the most important ones. So the first one basically says that we should seek peace. Again, every man ought to endeavor peace as far as he has hopes of obtaining it. But when a man cannot obtain it, every man has the right to use all helps and advantages of war. So this is the problem. And all the laws of nature only work in reciprocity. Reciprocity means that you follow the laws of nature only when other people follow them as well. This is going to be this big issue about, no, let's not go there. So in foro internal, in foro external. Those people who understand what I'm talking about. No, but again, this is technical, I don't want to go there. So anyway, so reciprocity, if other people are willing to seek peace, but only if other people are willing to seek peace, then we should lay down the right to all things and be contented with so much liberty against other men as we would allow other men against oneself. And that we should, make the social contract, and we should keep the social contract. And Hobbes is extensively going to talk about the fool's problem, which is the free rider problem, and it's not clear if Hobbes has a solution, right? So Hobbes is very much aware that some people could, like in this again Calliclean fashion, or the sophistic fashion of Callicles, Thrasymachus, or Glaucon, may try to benefit from the social contract without actually keeping their end of the bargain. So Hobbes knows about this possibility. He tries to solve it. Is he successful? That's a complicated question. So this is, again, he talks about, ultimately, he says, all 19 laws of nature boil down to the golden rule or the silver rule. Hobbes uses them interchangeably, right? Whatsoever you require that others should do to you, you do to them. This is the golden rule, or the silver rule. I think Hobbes at the end kind of prefers the silver rule formulation. Do not that to another which you would not have done to yourself, right? Do not unto others as you would not them do unto you. Do not that unto others as you would not them do unto you, right? silver rule or golden rule. Again, I think Hobbes kind of prefers the silver rule formulation because, you know, what do others want? It's a complicated thing, but we all know what we do not want: fear of death in the negative, right? And it's kind of interesting because when he talks about the laws of nature, he compares them to, like, again, simply prudential theorems. He says that in principle, being drunk is also against the laws of nature, because when you're drunk, by being drunk, you are endangering your life. And so breaking the laws of nature is doing anything which is against the reason of your self-preservation. So actually, like, technically speaking, drunkenness is also against the laws of nature. Okay. And then he kind of finishes with this quote, which is complicated in all sorts of ways. He says, these dictates of reason men used to call by the name laws, but improperly. Because, he says, these laws of nature are not laws of nature. They are simply conclusions or theorems concerning what conduces to the conservation and defense of man. Right? Whereas law properly is only the word of him that by right has command over others. Right? So this is what Hobbes says. And then, and you got to see, this is the problem. This is the problem of saying whether Hobbes is a believer or not. Does Hobbes believe in God? It's impossible to say. He says, but yet, if we consider the same theorems as delivered in the word of God, that by right commands all things, then they are properly called laws. But notice the if. He doesn't say there is a God and therefore we must obey the laws of nature. He doesn't say that. He says if there is a God, then they are his laws. But this question he does not resolve, and that's an issue. Anyway, and next year we're going to talk about these wonderful people, Taylor and Warrender, who are going to have a Kantian interpretation of Hobbes, who are going to say, no, actually Hobbes believes in God and believes in the laws of nature. I just, want to leave this hanging in the air, but I won't get into this right now. So finally, we need to get to the social contract. So in general, it's important to remember that we enter into the contract for the purpose of our own preservation. So again, like, the purpose of entering into the contract is the preservation of ourselves, right? And which is why some commentators called Leviathan the rebel's catechism, or if you want, the rebel's manual for rebellion, or handbook, right? Why? And again, Hobbes himself says in the introduction, he says that beset with those that contend on one side for too great liberty, on the other for too much authority, it's hard to pass between points of both unwounded, right? So Hobbes is trying to say that actually his idea in the Leviathan is to find a middle ground between too much liberty and too much authority. It's kind of a complicated phrase because, we keep talking about how the sovereign has all the rights, the sovereign has ultimate power. Isn't this too much authority? Where is the liberty? This is what we're going to talk about in a second. Okay, so this is a very famous phrase. Covenants without the sword are but words. Not sure, maybe this is not the best place to talk about this now, but there we have it. Now, let's talk about the limitations. Let's talk about the limitations of the covenant, right? So, very importantly, Hobbes says that a covenant or a contract to not defend oneself is always void. So void means null, right? Not effective, like automatically invalid, right? This is what Hobbes is saying. So even though it is only the people who sign the contract, we're going to talk about this in a second, even though the sovereign remains in the state of nature, and even though the sovereign, technically, because he's not bound, he or she, right, the sovereign is not bound by any agreement, the sovereign can do whatever. Nevertheless, if the sovereign requires you to not defend yourself, then the contract is automatically becomes invalid. So the subjects, technically speaking, like juridically, have no rights, but if the sovereign is trying to kill you, then the sovereign is no longer the sovereign. The contract is annulled. Okay, so long quote. Are we going to read it? Well, we're going to skim it. So Hobbes says that the contract, entering into a contract, is a voluntary act. And he says any voluntary act is done with an object of some good to yourself. So he says a man cannot lay down the right of resisting people who assault him by force. The same may be said of wounds, chains, and imprisonment. Because there is no benefit for suffering wounds, chains, or imprisonment to yourself, right? And also, a man cannot tell when he sees men proceed against him by violence whether they intend his death or not. And lastly, he says the motive and end of renouncing or transferring a right. Lastly, the motive of entering into the social contract is preservation of life as not to be weary of it. So life is not to be weary of it. So I suppose the idea is that if the sovereign is trying to torture you of your life, or if your life is like horribly miserable under the sovereign, right, then the contract also becomes annulled, right, invalidated. And therefore, Hobbes says, if a man by words or other signs seems to despoil himself of the end by which those signs were intended, then he is to be understood that as if he did not mean it, right? We should understand that a person was ignorant of how such words and actions were to be interpreted. So if you say that I sign the social contract and the sovereign can do whatever to me and even kill me and I will not resist, then we have to understand that I do not know the meaning of the words of English language. Like, you cannot sign a contract by which you resign, give up your right of defending yourself, right? Anyway, okay, so yeah, covenant upon any reasonable suspicion is void. Okay, so I'm not proceeding in order here, but it's kind of important to also realize that, again, Hobbes is going to say that sort of, again, this contract between the sovereign and the people, sorry, there is no contract between the sovereign and the people. That's very important. Only the people sign the social contract. It is only the people who sign the social contract. But the sovereign is the guarantor of the social contract. The sovereign is the power that guarantees the validity of the contract. Again, because, again, we have this phrase, covenants without the swords are but words. So we need the sword of the sovereign to guarantee the validity of the contract, right? And this means that if the sovereign loses the power to guarantee the contract, right, then the sovereign ceases to be the sovereign, right? The authority of the sovereign lasts only as long as the power to protect lasts. Again, we're going to talk about this later on. Hobbes is talking about the mutual relation between protection and obedience. Okay. So, well, yeah, I don't know. I have this phrase right now, right? So Hobbes is talking about the mutual relation between protection and obedience, and this is, in a certain sense, this is how Hobbes, even though he's a defender of absolute sovereignty, but still he puts natural limits to the power of the government. The government should have all the possible power, but if the government cannot protect you, right, then there is no reason for you to uphold your end of the contract. And the contract then automatically becomes void, even though, invalidated, even though, technically speaking, again, the sovereign doesn't sign any contracts, and so you have no rights. So you have, it's kind of, technically, like, legally speaking, the idea is that you have no rights against the sovereign. You have no rights against the sovereign whatsoever. But there are conditions under which the sovereign can lose the sovereignty, right? If the sovereign doesn't have the power to protect you. Okay. So yeah, I talked about this before. So consensus is impossible. Yeah, we agree to disagree. And nominate a sovereign. What should I talk about next? Yeah, well, I suppose we can talk about this. We can talk about the definition of the social contract. So the social contract basically works like this. This is, if you want, the idealized version of the text of the social contract. So each man is taken to say, I authorize and give up my right of governing myself to this man or to this assembly of men, on this condition that you give up your right to him as well and authorize all his actions in the like manner. So I suppose, maybe this is a good time to talk about how for Hobbes, sovereignty is really an office. It's not a person, it's an office. And he says the sovereign can be one man, in which case this is a monarchy, or the sovereign can be the decision of the assembly. If into this assembly everybody can enter, this is a democracy. And if it's an assembly only of a part of the people, then it's called aristocracy. So for Hobbes, you have three possible forms of government: monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. And all of them are legitimate. Hobbes has a mild preference. He has a conditional preference for monarchy. But he doesn't really have like a geometrical proof that monarchy is the best of all. Like, if you are born in a democracy, you should not try to change the form of the government. That's the idea. Like, he thinks that in general monarchies tend to do better. But democracy is fine too. If you are born in a democracy, you should also keep up your end of the bargain. You should also be obedient to a democracy. He gives reasons as to why he thinks monarchy is better. I suppose the most important one being that it's less prone to civil wars because the monarch usually cannot disagree with himself. Whereas, in a democracy, if the parliament, it's a complicated question, right? In a democracy, if the vote is split 50-50 between the people, right, then this could lead to a civil war, right? Because half the population will not agree to what the other half has decided. Okay. So, it's kind of a complicated story. Not sure again how to proceed best. Well, I talked about democracy a second ago. So maybe let's talk about this for 5 seconds. What is the difference for Hobbes between democracy and anarchy? Hobbes is going to say that democracy is, again, we vote. I mean, again, when he talks about democracy, again, he says assembly of men into which everybody has the right to enter. An assembly of men into which everybody has the right to enter. So like Athenian assembly, for example, so all citizens have the right to enter. But the point of a democracy is that we take a vote and then we all agree with the result of the vote. It doesn't matter how we voted, we go along with the decision of the majority. Whereas anarchy is each man for himself. So there's a difference between democracy and anarchy for Hobbes, and this is kind of very important to understand. So again, we're talking about this idea that the sovereign is the guarantor of the social contract. The sovereign does not sign the social contract, and therefore sovereign remains in the state of nature. And therefore, technically speaking, the sovereign has all the rights. And Hobbes talks about the 12 rights of the sovereign, but which is in an important sense to say that the sovereign has all the rights. And you could ask this question, like, why would we even obey the sovereign then, right? And Hobbes even is going to talk about how there is no difference between sovereignty by institution, so if we have made a contract, and sovereignty by acquisition, which is conquest. Or in general, like, if you imagine the people who are born, like newborn babies, are already born into a society, and we already find ourselves with the present sovereign. Do we choose the sovereign? Well, no, not really. We go along with the existing government because it protects us, again, this mutual relation between protection and obedience, and we go out of fear. So for Hobbes, the basis of social solidarity is fear. Fear of the state of nature, but also fear of the sovereign, fear of the punishment from the sovereign, right? And you could ask this question, well, doesn't this make this whole arrangement tyrannical? Why would you, again, you see, under the contract, you have absolutely no guarantees, you have no provisions. And the only reason when the contract becomes void or annulled, right, invalid, is when the sovereign is either trying to kill you or if the sovereign loses the power to protect you. For example, if the sovereign has lost in battle, right? So you could say, why is actually Hobbes not afraid of the government? Sort of if in the state of nature we are glory-seeking and appetitive and distrustful, why would we trust the sovereign? Why would we trust the sovereign? And there's a very important line of argument, and I definitely need to touch upon that. And the line of argument is the following, right? So Hobbes has a very important chapter in the Leviathan, chapter 30 of the Office of the Sovereign Representative, which we'll need to read at some point, probably next year, very carefully. And in this chapter, Hobbes says that, actually, it's in a different chapter, but in an adjacent chapter, Hobbes says, no king can be rich, no king can be glorious, no king can be secure, whose subjects are too poor, too contemptible, or too weak to maintain a war against the enemies. So you see, again, for Hobbes, the driving force behind politics is fear. So who is going to force the sovereign to take care of the subjects? It is the other sovereigns. The fear of other sovereigns is going to force the sovereign to take care of the subjects. So we do not have any rights. So we do not have rights. So no right. But we have a reasonable expectation that the sovereign will take care of us. So not a right, but a reasonable expectation that the sovereign will take care of us. That the sovereign will take care of us. Again, we don't have a right to demand that, but we have a reasonable expectation that the sovereign will do that. And again, there are, again, covenants without swords are but words. Which swords? The swords of other sovereigns, right? And so again, this is a quote to the same effect. He says that the greatest that in any form of government can possibly happen to people in general is scarce sensible compared to the miseries and horrible calamities that accompany a civil war. So he says that the government sometimes can be harsh on the people, but nothing is worse than a civil war. So I have this simple formula here on the board. If you take one thing from this lecture, take this thing. Hobbes is saying that even the worst tyranny is still better than anarchy. Even the worst tyranny is still better than anarchy. Or, again, notice, I have a greater than or equal sign. So if you imagine the worst tyranny where you're being sent into a concentration camp to die, that is as bad as the state of nature, but not really worse than the state of nature. This is ultimately the whole Hobbesian point. And this is why we don't have any rights. And this is why the only excuse for disobeying this, well, again, technically speaking, you can never disobey the sovereign, but there are conditions when the sovereign stops being a sovereign. And this condition is when the sovereign cannot protect you, right? Or is trying to kill you actively, right? But still, you can expect the sovereign to take care of you because, again, he says the greatest pressure of sovereign governors proceeds from enemies, right? So you need, the strength of the sovereign consists in the vigor of the subjects, because the sovereign needs healthy subjects in order to protect himself or itself from the enemies. And Hobbes even goes so much as to speak about good laws and just laws. And he says that the sovereign decides what is justice. So every law that the sovereign makes is automatically just. But a good law is not the same thing as a just law, because the good laws are the laws that are good for the people, goods which are needful for the good of the people. And you see, you could ask this question, well, but Hobbes is this amoralist, we're all different and glory-seeking. Why would the sovereign make good laws? And again, you see, Hobbes is going to say the sovereign has an interest in making good laws because it is in the strength of the subjects, the vigor of the subjects, that the strength of the sovereign lies. And you see, I think this is the wonderful strength of Hobbesian analysis. I'm going to come back to this, I think, next time when we talk about Locke, because I think this is exactly the weakness of Locke's analysis. You see, Hobbes is going to tell us that he's going to give us the general history of all mankind. He's going to say, in all times and in all places, people obeyed the government, no matter how rapacious, no matter how horrible the government was, out of fear. He says the slaves obeyed the pharaohs in Egypt because they were afraid to die, and it was better to live as slaves rather than die. Right? This is the idea, and Hobbes is not going to blame the people of the past for doing that. Right? So Hobbes is going to give us the general conditions of history for all mankind. But at the same time, Hobbes is also going to provide for the possibility of progress. It could be that in earlier times, the governments were worse, behaved less humanely towards their people. But through time, you have this competition between sovereigns. And gradually, through this competition between sovereigns, you have evolving something like a system under which the sovereigns are actually interested in keeping their subjects safe and secure, right? So Hobbes, at the same time, is going to provide the general conditions of mankind and say why everybody obeys everywhere, and at the same time, why life may gradually improve. Again, so possibility of progress. And it's an important question because, I would say that everybody after Hobbes has to take this idea seriously. And even Karl Marx is going to talk about the evolution of the social system. And notice, he's going to talk about how each new socio-economic structure, or mode of production, is more efficient than the previous mode of production, drives it to extinction, right? How capitalism drives feudalism to extinction because capitalism is more powerful. Again, this idea of, to some extent, maybe even might makes right. And continuing on from this, Karl Marx is going to say that communism has to be a more efficient, a more powerful system than capitalism. And communism is supposed to drive capitalism to extinction as well. So I think that there's, again, I keep talking about how I think there's a basic agreement between Hobbes and Rousseau. I think there may also be a certain level of basic agreement, a certain element of basic agreement between Hobbes and Karl Marx, right? And, talk about sovereignty, Marx is, He has democratic elements in his vision of communism. He has anarchic even elements in his vision of communism. Who is going to be the sovereign under communism? Well, maybe it's going to be the people in their collective capacity. And Hobbes provides for that. An assembly of men into which every man has a right to enter. That's a legitimate form of government for the sovereign, right? I mean, if you open the Russian constitution, who is the sovereign of Russia? According to the constitution, it is the people of Russia in their collective capacity who express their will, especially through the referendum. And what rights do you have against the people of Russia in their collective capacity? No rights whatsoever. There are some rights which are enshrined in the constitution, but it is the people of Russia who are, who have made the constitution and who can change the constitution, at least according to law, right? In a referendum. And in this sense, our constitution is Hobbesian and not Lockean. Constitution of Russia, for example. Okay. So, not sure if there's anything else I want to mention. Well, there's a million different things I want to mention. But that's I guess that's the basic idea. Well, couple things. Yeah, Hobbes is very clear on this. He says, though nothing can be immortal which mortals make, yet if men had the use of reason, they pretend the commonwealth may be secured at least from perishing by internal disease. So Hobbes is to some extent pessimistic about the success of his story. So this, you have to remember this, right? So he has painted the picture of this wonderfully powerful Leviathan. But Hobbes understands that there are problems, and these problems are going to erode the power. So under ideal circumstances, the Leviathan, the government, right, would maintain complete authority over all religious and secular matters, right? And then the Commonwealth would live as long as is theoretically possible. But this is not what happens. And in fact, there will be dissension. There will be problems. There will be free riders. There will be fools. There will be people who will break the covenant without a good reason. And because of this, unfortunately, most countries are going to die. The same way how most human beings will die, also most countries are going to die eventually. By internal dissension. And by far the biggest problem that Hobbes sees in his day is religious fanaticism. And this is kind of, well, I'm not sure if this is so relevant today. Also, always a complicated question. It's hard to be objective about what's going on in the news. But, in Hobbes' time, this was definitely a key concern, right? So religious fanaticism is a huge problem for Hobbes, right? He says, he asked this question, I see not why any man should render a reason for his faith. Why every Christian should not also be a prophet, or why any man should take the law of his country rather than his own inspiration for the rule of his action. So if any man can simply by his or her own free will decide that they are prophets from God and can interpret the religion in any way they want, or can establish any new religion, then no peace can be possible. There are other problems, but this is probably the biggest problem that Hobbes is writing against. He's writing against religious fanatics. And again, the religious dissent, especially conflict between Protestants and Catholics, was a big issue in both in the English Civil War and in the 30 Years' War. So that's the basic idea, and a bit of an anticlimactic finish. But I think I mentioned everything I wanted to talk about. So on this note, I'll leave you with this. So you have this all-powerful Leviathan. But who is made of the citizens? Again, it's like the strength of the Leviathan is strength of citizens united. It is only because we unite our wills in the person of the sovereign for our mutual advantage, which is the preservation of ourselves. Only because of that, the sovereign has the power. So in this sense, Hobbes is trying to pass between the two horns of the dilemma, between too much authority and too much liberty. Yes, the government exists with consent of the governed, but we should consent to absolute authority, because nothing short of absolute authority can actually guarantee peace and security. So I guess that's the final idea. Okay, I'm sure there's a million other things to talk about, but we have to stop somewhere. So thank you very much, colleagues. If you have any questions, let's discuss them in the seminars. Otherwise, again, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this was instructive and stimulating. And I will see you. I will see you next time. And as always, take care.